Hey guys, welcome back. My name is McLean, and this is another one of my live streams where we'll be learning to sew together Spider-Man suits, and specifically the Amazing Spider-Man 1 suit that I've got right here. You can see the mask for. And what this stream is going to focus on specifically is these seams that are hidden next to webbing segments. You can see this middle seam going on the forehead, and then also these seams on the chin, and then on either side there are seams, and they're hidden underneath the puff painted or screen printed webbing. And it's a really cool effect because it actually hides the seam and makes it a lot harder to see, and kind of is a cool effect for people who see it. And I'll show you a picture of the actual movie suit here. If you look at the movie suit, I actually have audio this time for looking at pictures, but if you look at the movie suit here, you can see that even they have these types of seams that are hidden next to the webbing, and it also is in the second Amazing Spider-Man suit, and it's a pretty neat little effect. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how you go about doing that. I'm going to do it with the leg piece here. So what I'm going to be showing you is, you can see it's got these black webbing lines along the outside, and so we're going to sew right on the outside of those webbing lines, and it'll give it a really neat effect. And then also I'm going to go over what you do about a corner, like this corner right in here. It's a little dark, but how you go about sewing a corner like that so it still lays flat. So I'll go over that too, but that comes right after I go over sewing the webs. The first thing that you need to do before you try to sew behind the webs is you have to sketch on the opposite side the outside of the webbing line, and you want to be as detailed as you possibly can, because this really comes into play when you're sewing the pieces together. You want to sew right next to that line, because this line is the outside of the puff paint line, and so if you sew right up next to that line, you hide your seam right behind the puff paint really well. So you have to use either a light table, or you could hold the pieces of fabric up to a window to be able to see through, because you have to be able to see the puff paint on the other side before you can trace it. Because I recommend tracing it, because as soon as you get onto your sewing machine and under this light, it's really hard to see the webbing on the other side. I've tried to just sew next to it based on the bump that's there, but it's really difficult. Another thing you need to keep in mind is that rather than using a standard sewing machine foot like what I've got right here, where the needle goes in the center hole here, it goes in and out of that central hole, you need to use a zipper foot. And the difference between the zipper foot and the regular foot is that the zipper foot allows the needle to go on the side rather than in the center. So you can get the foot right up next to something. Usually for a zipper, you have the foot getting right up next to an invisible zipper, and that lets the needle go right next to whatever you're sewing next to. So obviously that works really well for sewing a seam right behind a webbing segment. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start pinning these two pieces together in order to sew and hide the webbing segment, or hide the seam. So this is how the two pieces go together. This red piece goes up on top on this blue piece. And you could, if you're designing your own pattern, you could just separate these two pieces, but I just did not want a little tiny triangle piece like this. Otherwise, I mean, this suit is already super confusing, and that would just kind of throw it over the edge. And so basically, and this kind of gets into how to sew a corner too, this is kind of going through both of them at the same time. You have to focus on one line at a time. You're not going to be able to pin both of these edges around the corner. You have to focus on one at a time. And so I'm going to start on this bottom edge here that lines up with the pants right here. So what you actually do is you flip it over, because they go against each other. If you're watching this, hopefully you have a little bit of experience sewing and you know how to put pieces together. You know, you're putting the face of both pieces together so that they the seam is hidden on the inside. So you're going to be going through with the start of the point there. The start of this point lines up with this kind of line detail on the leg piece, which is also inside of the pattern on the back here. And if you look at the back of the blue really fast, you'll see that I've got the outline dotted with Sharpie, and I found that outline because it's half an inch away from the edge of the piece. This edge of the color here where it stops, the outline is always half an inch in there. So I'll start from the end here, and I'm always going to be keeping the red piece on top. The blue piece, if you can see here, the blue piece has its detail go off beyond the actual outline. The detail extends beyond the outline, and that's so that you have a little bit of room to mess up, because it's only important that you line up with the red edge, because you're hiding right below the web. So you're never sewing with the blue side on top, or sometimes you're sewing two red pieces together. It's just always the webbing segment on top. So I start this one at that tip. You really want to line everything up. And there's even a curve to this line, so you've got to make sure that you go along and line up both of those curve shapes. You don't want to just cut across and make a straight line between those two curved edges, which is a mistake a lot of new people make. Thanks for tuning in, by the way, guys. It's always cool to have you guys tune in. I know that you guys are probably a little sick of seeing sewing tutorials and stuff, but I'm just so glad to finally be making specifically this sewing tutorial. I've needed to make for over a year, and so I'm just over the moon that I'm actually finally making this tutorial. It's really difficult to figure out how to do a tutorial like this and make sure like you can see what I'm doing right now, and even it's a little difficult to see. I'm going to go ahead and make an adjustment. I can't look any further down than that. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right on the edge of that point, because this edge right here and the edge on the top of the pants become the same edge once this is finished, once the two pieces are together. Here's the already sewn together version here. You can see this is the other side. So what I was talking about is you got the top of the pants and the top of this detail, so they both are the same edge at that point. But I'll end up sewing that right now and then going around that corner. So starting right on that point, and like I said, you want to get right up next to that line. It's careful to be, really precise. That's my coffee machine. Should have turned that off. Now that it's in there, you can start taking the pins out. I've seen some sewing tutorials. I actually looked at a sewing tutorial today just to see how they filmed their setup, and they sewed right over their pins. But the thing about sewing spandex is you're using a ballpoint pin. I should have referenced that before I started, but I've mentioned it before. You're using a ballpoint. It's not a really sharp needle. It's actually kind of a rounded bottom needle, and that doesn't tear the spandex. It forces itself through the material of the spandex, and because if you tear it with a regular needle, then you're kind of perforating it and it's more likely to rip. Another note, now that I'm getting ready to go into the bulk of sewing this, well, first I'll do the bar tack. What the bar tack is going forward and then backwards again and then forwards again, and that creates a knot. It knots your seam so it doesn't come apart at the edge. So I've gone over this before, but since we're sewing spandex, which is a stretchy material, I'm actually pulling the material. You're not typically supposed to pull the material while you're sewing, but for spandex, if you stretch the material as you sew, it makes your seam stretch after that. The spandex contracts back to where it was. So you stretch, and then also if you have two curves that are kind of opposing curves, when you pull it, it pulls it into a straight line, and that makes it easy to match both of those curves. And I always stop and take the needle out with about 1/2 centimeter to spare, because if you get too close to the needle, it can create little bumps in the shape of the webbing. And so I'm trying to get as close as possible to this pen line, and even sometimes a little bit on it. It's possible to go too far and sew over the webbing, and if that happens, you just need to snip that little segment of webbing and re-sew it. And also, on the other side of that, if you sew too far away, we'll see here in a second, maybe I've sewn some of it too far away. So I'm stopping right up in this corner, and to do a half stitch, I'm too close to the edge to do a full stitch, but I'm also not quite there yet. So as I'm getting ready to complete this next stitch, I'm going to hit the reverse button, and right at that second it gives me a little half stitch because it backs up the motion right at that moment. And then you need to continue to reverse to do another bar tack. Anchor it there. And I don't anchor it too much, because you want to check now. Now that you've finished this seam, you want to go through and make sure that you've actually kept it along the webbing, which looks pretty good here. You can see that it's right inside there. You can see a little bit of red, but I think that's pretty much always going to happen, and it even happens on the movie suit. Here, if I show you this picture again of the movie suit, and we zoom out and move over a little bit, like over here, there's a little bit of red on the outside of that webbing segment, and you can see, like right here, this is a seam where they hid the seam right next to the webbing, and the thread kind of pulled apart a little bit, so you can see the thread, but because it's red thread, you barely even notice it. The only way I saw was the difference in shading right here versus the difference in shading right here when pulling the pattern apart through pictures. So that's kind of how I figured that out initially, that they hide their seams underneath their webs like that, and it really looks a lot neater, because you can try to do puff paint over an already finished seam, but if anyone has tried to do that, it's really difficult. It's really difficult to do puff paint over the seam and not have it kind of stick to one side on one area and the other side on another area, and then in some areas it soaks into the seam, and so it kind of looks rough, and it can even make the seam less flexible if it soaks in. So anyway, going back to what I'm working on here, this is kind of how you address corners. There we go. So now what I'm going to be end up doing is I'm going to try and get this piece to go down, but as you can see, it's fighting, and it doesn't really want to do that. It's all kind of, it looks like I almost did it wrong, just because it's so difficult to get it to line up. But the key And I've never, this is kind of just the way I self-taught myself to figured it out, is you figure out which is the inner corner piece. So for this instance, it's this red piece here that comes into the corner and is the one that has to really change. It has to bend a lot to start this next seam. So what I do is I come in close to the seam that I just did, and I go right up into the corner. Snip right all the way up into that corner. And what that allows you to do is take this blue piece and take it out and flip it outside. And now this is just its own seam that can be dealt with. You can see this edge, that is where the web is. And this right here, this little point where it starts at, is the other side of the corner. And you can kind of move it around so you can see how it actually fits as a corner piece, and then eventually is the finished corner. And this is something that comes up, like if you're sewing a Superman costume, like the classic Christopher Reeves Superman costume, the S is sewn on like this. Like I have actually seen the movie Superman costume in a collection once, and their corners, what I'm demonstrating right now, like they're perfect. They're just flawless. If you try sewing these corners, you'll find that it's really difficult not to bunch up a little bit of material in the corner to get the spacing just right. But of course, Hollywood studios have much more expensive, refined sewing machines for this kind of stuff. They have actual, professional sergers for spandex and dancewear and stuff that they use, and that does the best job, hands down. I have a serger, and I'll pull that out in a little while. But I'm trying to teach with the standard sewing machine just because it. I'm kind of away from the camera here. I'm just pinning everything up again. I'm trying to teach with a standard sewing machine because I know that's the most prevalent thing people have to sew with. And you can even do what I'm doing, hand sewing. It would take a long time and it wouldn't look quite as neat and refined, but you could do it. I've seen people hand sew their Spider-Man suits together, and it's pretty crazy. Okay, so this is a really long seam. I'm not going to go all the way down it, because I want to teach other things. I'm going to try to kind of wrap this one up in a little bit and then start another one on the glove. Okay, so I'm starting up here at the corner. I'm not sure how well you can see here. Right there, you can kind of see the web, and where the line starts, that's where the corner starts. So my webbing has to start like right where that pink fabric edge and the line meet, and that will give me the other side of this corner. So I want to line it up. And then I can take this pin out. I need to go in reverse to hold it in place. I'm kind of going outside of the line, it looks like, a little bit, but that'll demonstrate what I need to do to fix it. Okay, that's good for that bit of the demonstration, so I can show you how I fix that. So I've just sewn that little bit, and I kind of lost the line a little bit. Sometimes even if you've traced the line, it can be difficult to find it. So what you see I've got here is there's a lot of red showing on the outside of that web, and that's pretty sloppy. You don't want something like that to happen, and it's really easy to fix. All you need to do is look back at the inside that you were just sewing, and if you look at it, you can see that those places where you can see red, you can tell when your seam is kind of far away from your line, depending on how well you traced the outer edge of your webbing. It really just pays to go through and neatly trace the outer edge of your webbing, and then it's easier to sew up against. If you're the one doing like the puff painting and someone else is sewing it, then maybe you should be the one to go and do the tracing along the outside edge, so that they don't have to worry about that. Because if you go to someone to sew one of these suits together and it's just too much stuff like tracing and sewing and stuff, they might just say no outright. But hopefully with these videos, it gives people enough knowledge to put one of these suits together. Okay, line it up. It's just inside the last little bit of sewing I did. So that's a little bit better. So you would keep going all the way down, and if you don't have a serger or anything to finish off these edges, then you'd want to go over every edge twice. What I'm doing right now, stretching the fabric as I go along. You want to go over every edge twice so that it's extra durable. Using heavy-duty thread is a really good idea because it makes the thread stronger and the seam stronger. I've mentioned that a lot, but use heavy-duty thread, and you go over the seams twice, and you really don't have to worry about your seams coming apart. And then you can even trim your edge. You could go along here and cut your edge off, and then you do a zigzag stitch over the edge that you've just trimmed, and it's kind of like a makeshift serge seam. And so that is a lot stronger. That's funny. I haven't looked at comments recently. Josh just talked about my pin watch. Yeah, the pin. I made this pin cushion for my wrist. It's a lot easier to just sew along and then put your pins away right away. So I'm actually, next, really quick, I'm going to show you the Serger. And now the Serger is basically an industrial sewing machine. Not necessarily this one. This is a more consumer Serger. But what you'll see here in a second is that it cuts while it sews, and it makes a flexible stitch. So you can see it's a lot more of a heavy-duty machine. It's got 2 needles here, and then it's got all of this mechanics that go along with it underneath. A lot of stuff, and it's complicated to thread all of these things. It can kind of be a pain in the butt because there's so many little loops and things you have to go through. But the Serger is just really good for cleaning up edges. I'll clean up an edge here right now just to kind of give you a demonstration. So what it does, if you look right here, you see this little tooth guide that's going up and down. That actually cuts the fabric, and the fabric kind of drapes down this little ramp, and yeah, it cleans up the edge, and it makes it a lot nicer. And so I do a combination of both when I'm sewing these web edges. I was a little too far away there. I could probably go through again and get a little closer to that initial web. but it's already cleaned up the seam a lot and made it nicer. Still stretches. And then also, I only use the serger when I'm doing pieces like, say I was sewing both of these leg pieces together on the inseam. I would only use the serger just because it's a much, stretchier stitch, and it's how active wear is actually sewn together. Like if you have an Under Armour shirt, all of the seams are serged. Although actually that's most clothing is serged together, but especially stretchy stuff. So a serger is very helpful if you're doing anything sewing wise. I'll do another little demonstration. I've got a scrap piece here just to show what the serger does. So you can see it's cutting the edge and also cutting the piece in half here. And that's very useful for doing flexible type spandex stuff. Okay, cool. So I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover for hiding seams under webs and then also going around corners. And so I am going to go ahead and move on to sewing the glove, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. I'm going to start a separate stream for that. Reading comments right now. Luke asked, aren't you scared of your finger getting caught under the needle? I've never ever sewn over my finger. I've heard of people sewing over and through their fingers, but it's pretty easy. It just takes being conscious of where your body parts are, and then just respectful of how dangerous and how likely it is you can hurt yourself. And so I rarely hurt myself anymore when I work on projects. I used to, cut myself every now and then, but I've gotten a lot better, and I rarely ever injure myself. It just takes a little bit of patience whenever you're doing something that can injure yourself. Dalton asked, could you use the serger for gloves? The difficult thing about the serger, if you just saw that seam I just made, is it's really hard to do intricate little details with the serger because the cutting element is like 2 centimeters, like half an inch away from the needles. So it's really hard to kind of perfectly line up your seam and just start right in some area. And with really little tiny needles or seams, edges, like in the gloves has really tiny little seams that are close together. You would need some kind of special serger, I think, that does tiny little seams like that. And I think that's what they use for the movie films. But for my purposes, I have to use my standard sewing machine just because of the extent of my knowledge. Okay, cool. That's actually going to be the next thing that I tackle in a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and take the pieces of the glove and start putting those together. It'll be a little more difficult than what I just did here, and it'll take a lot longer. That's going to be a long stream. But yeah, I'll be back in a little bit with that stream. So tune in for that.